Welcome back to Hear Me Out Audiology. This is our next episode, and we have a very special guest today that we're going to be hosting. So, we'll be talking about raising a child that's diagnosed with a profound hearing loss and just getting the perspective of a parent who has gone through it and then some insights of what she feels other parents may need to know. So, this is my aunt Shanette, and she is the mother of the cousin that some of you may have heard that I've talked about in the past of why I was interested in audiology in the beginning as to why hearing loss even exists, how it exists. So we're going to hear from her today and just go through some questions and hopefully shed some insight to everyone. So the first question today that we have is just tell me a little bit about the first time that you discovered that your child had hearing loss and what it felt like, what went through your mind, anything like that.
I remember my sister-in-law telling me that she thought that Brittany couldn't hear, and I was 19 years old. So, of course, I was in deep denial. I didn't want to hear that. So I was like, no, I don't think that's the case. But as the months went on, I did start noticing that she wasn't speaking when my other niece was speaking. She wasn't doing little things that kids her age were able to do. And so I took her to her doctor, who referred me to an audiologist for testing. And so that was around the age of 2 for her.
And so from that point, if you can remember at all, when the audiologist told you that Brittany has a hearing loss, what did that feel like to you?
I remember, kind of observing the process, her being in the booth and her really trying to concentrate on what they were asking her to do. She did very well, given that she couldn't hear any of the instructions, but they were able to kind of coach her along and just hoping on top of hope that when they came out of the booth, they would say like, no, there's nothing wrong with her hearing. She's fine. But when they came out of the booth, they sat me down and they said, we've completed our testing and Brittany does have a profound hearing loss. And at 19, I remember being there. I had brought my niece, who was the same age as Brittany, just as a support for her, and just sitting there being numb, feeling like someone had just punched me in the stomach because I'm 19, I'm single, I have this child who now has this severe disability and not knowing what was going to be next. So I just remember being numb. And even the audiologist asked me, what do you feel? Does it feel like someone just kind of punched you in the gut? And I said, yes. And just broke out crying and frantic. And they really supported me and helped me to just kind of calm down and understand that this was not the end for her, that, she had a lot of options and support that could possibly help her along her way.
And at that time, do you feel like the resources they gave you were enough? Do you feel like they should have given you more? You wish they would have given you more? Or do you, like, what do you
Yeah,
feel
at
from
that
that?
time, I felt like maybe I didn't know what I should know, or I didn't know what I needed at the time. I just knew that I needed something to help me understand kind of what happens next. And they were very supportive in giving me resources for educational opportunities. They set her up with temporary hearing aids right there on the spot. And then, of course, we had to go through the insurance process to get the permanent hearing aid, but helped me with sign language resources right away, some videos, and some, kind of printed documents that I could help myself start learning ASL. And support for the family that was around me as well. So like my parents who I lived with at the time and my niece who was her same age. So just giving me these resources that could at least help me start down the path of understanding what would be next for us.
Now, were they ever able to come up with the reason as to why she had the hearing loss or where it came from? Was there any genetic testing done at that time, or was there any known infections, anything that could have pointed to what it was? Because
So Brittany did have a bout of meningitis when she was about a year old. And they suspect that that is where the hearing loss started and that her hearing bottomed out from there over time. So I remember a time where we would sing to her and she would mimic us singing. So I know that she was hearing something earlier on. I don't know that this meningitis is the reason. I don't know that she wasn't born with a significant amount of hearing loss and then it just bottomed out. But I do remember when we would sing to her as a baby, we had to sing really loud in order for her to respond. So that's why I suspect that maybe she was born deaf and had some hearing at birth. But over time, the responses stopped. We would say little funny things to her and she would respond earlier on, but then after a while it stopped. And I believe that that's when my sister-in-law noticed that something's not right because she's not acting the way she used to act.
That's news to me because I didn't know that. So that's
Yeah,
interesting to learn about that. Now, you mentioned earlier that you were young when you had Brittany and that this was something that happened when you were younger. Do you recall any challenges or anything that you faced that maybe could shed some light to someone that might be in the same predicament or a young mother that's just finding this out now? Do you have anything that you feel that you went through that maybe you can shed some light on for someone else that might be going through it too?
I would say nobody is ever prepared to hear a diagnosis like this. No one's ever prepared to learn that they have a child with a disability, especially when they're still pretty much a child. So I would say making sure that you have a steady and constant support system is the first thing, but educating yourself on what it is that your child is experiencing, I think is the key to helping them through whatever it is. So we have to remember that the diagnosis isn't happening to us, it's happening to them. And so we are their support. And so we just have to educate ourselves, make sure that we understand. We have to advocate for them because they can't advocate for themselves. And we just have to make sure that whatever it is that we do is in the best interest of the child later in life. There were lots of options that came my way, and I chose to just wait and allow Brittany to make her own decisions about her hearing.
That's a good one. That's something that I try to think about too, is that I can offer the latest and greatest technology. I can tell them about all types of things, but it's really going to fall back onto what the parent wants for their child. And sometimes that's hard as people that are in the field of audiology because we want a quick fix. We want to make sure that the child is oral, speaking, and following along in that way. But sometimes that's not always the best for the
Right.
child or best for the family. So it's always good to hear that from a parent that made that decision for their child to be able to make the decision of what they want to do when they get older and not
Exactly.
necessarily jump on it for them at
Yeah,
such
there
a
was a
young
lot
age.
of pressure to do the cochlear implant. That was a very new technology then. It was really still in trial stages at that time.
Hmm.
And people were really pressuring me to do it. And I remember one doctor saying to me, just beware that it may not take. The severity of her hearing loss is such that she may not receive any benefits from it. And then she has to live with this for the rest of her life. So I was like, I don't know if that's the best thing to do right now. I probably should let her make that decision because if it doesn't take and then she has this instrument implanted into her brain, what is that going to be like for her? So that was kind of where my decision was solidified with that doctor, just kind of giving me that information.
The technology has definitely improved from back then, but it is still something to keep in mind. And just like now being a new professional, still keeping in mind that, yes, in school we were taught, like, you know, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread type of devices or whatever. But again, what is that going to do for the child in the long run? Are they going to reject it? Are they going to want it? And that's something that we have to keep in mind as well. Just when we make recommendations to kind of remove ourselves from it and make sure that the
Right.
family feels that we're just providing them the resources and not telling them what to do. So that's good. That was something that was given to you as an option at that time, but then you making the decision ultimately what was going to be best for Brittany. So I guess we answered this question already, but looking back at the early years or even now, like just what advice do you give to parents with children with hearing loss or even like, going through the timeline of my baby maybe didn't pass or failed the newborn hearing screening, and now I got to go take them to get this diagnostic testing done. Like, what are some things that you maybe would want to encourage those families going through that, or give them wisdom from what
Yeah.
you've experienced?
Yeah. I mean, I experienced it with my two other children as well. So with Brittany, I didn't have a negative test that came back at birth. But with my two other children, Sonia and Jared, they both failed their hearing test from the hospital. The way they notified me was via a letter, and they both were born around the end of August. So it was ironic that both of those letters came over Labor Day weekend. So, the panic set in, the wondering, what does this mean set in. And so my advice would be, try to stay as calm as possible, because both of them, did pass the test at the second round. I believe Jared had to go 3 rounds before he passed it. But, just try to stay as calm as possible, knowing that even if the diagnosis is that your child has a hearing loss, that there are so many options there for them now, that they can grow up to be independent individuals that are, a part of society, who can contribute just as well as any other person with full abilities. I would say that yes, it is a devastating thing to learn, but knowing, that the outcome could be just as bright for your child as for any other child is, I think, something to keep in mind for sure.
Well, that's the end of this, the end of all of my questions. But I think this is definitely going to be something that's very insightful for families, and hopefully this reaches people that maybe didn't know what to do once they got that diagnosis. And your voice can
Yeah.
be something that just uplifts them and keeps them on the right path, and helps them maybe decide what to do with their child moving forward. But
One thing that I did not mention that I think is a valid point is, for everyone that does receive a diagnosis of hearing loss or deafness, is to start the process of learning American Sign Language immediately. Not just the parents, but the supporting family members and the community around that child should all learn American Sign Language. I do know that something for Brittany has been just kind of feeling isolated, because not a lot of people around her speak sign language. And so for anyone out there that's listening who might be dealing with this same scenario, I would just encourage them, as well as their family and anyone that will be in close contact with their child, to learn as much sign language. It's not as hard as it seems. You learned it just by communicating with Brittany. It's not as hard as it seems, and it's the most inclusive way to make sure that your child is supported. And so we talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion, and then we want to talk about equity. In order for people to feel like they're equal, is to be able to communicate with everyone around them. And so we just definitely want to make sure that we learn sign language right away.
that's a great point. And that's definitely something that I keep in mind too when I'm counseling patients that have a new diagnosis of hearing loss. I want to make sure that even if you do go the route of amplification, you should still have a backup way of communication, just because batteries can die and you don't want their communication to stop when the batteries die. So,
Absolutely.
um,
Batteries can die. They have a community that they're a part of, even though they have amplification, and they should still be able to communicate with those who have chosen to use ASL as their primary language. And
mhm.
so we would definitely not want to isolate them from those who are like them, even though they are now a part of the hearing community.
I 100% agree. Couldn't have said it better. I really couldn't have said it any better. I truly couldn't. So, I do really appreciate you taking the time to just shed wisdom, shed light. It helped me to understand a little bit better too. So, hopefully that the people that hear this, that it touches, that it makes a difference in somebody's life, because there's always going to be a new diagnosis of hearing loss. But what we do with that is what's going to make a difference. So, um,
Absolutely.
thank you so much, TTNet, for
Thank
joining
you.
my podcast. But today, that is all, folks. So hear me out, because we got a lot to talk about.